All right, so I'm Rowan. I'm a PhD student at the University of New Mexico, and my project is working on automating waterfowl census at national wildlife refuge systems and classifying classifying imagery with machine learning. So, why do we want to census waterfowl at wildlife refuges? So, Fish and Wildlife Service has a mandate to manage populations of protected waterfowl. And because we've lost a lot of historic wetland habitat that acted as stopover and overwintering habitat for migratory species, especially in the Southwest, a lot of this habitat has to be actively managed, which is parlance for we have to make it. We have to artificially flood areas and grow food to support these migratory birds. So we need to know how many are coming through to ensure that we have adequate habitat and adequate food available for them. And so our current census methods, which rely on counts either conducted on the ground or from occupied aircraft, are inefficient. They're really costly to stage. They take a lot of time. And there's a lot of count uncertainty. It turns out that people are just not very good at counting lots of individual animals, especially in groups that number in the thousands. And so we're thinking that augmenting annual censuses with drones and then image analysis with machine learning will help us ultimately to save field time, expenses, and hopefully produce more timely and precise outputs. So we have UAS field surveys from our core site is Bosque del Apache National Wildlife Refuge, and then we also have some field surveys from a few auxiliary sites at Maxwell National Wildlife Refuge, the Lattice Gordon Waterfowl Complex, which is a state-managed protected area, and also Rio Grande State Park, which is kind of a semi-protected area inside the city of Albuquerque. And then we have from these combined field surveys, which consist of about 5,000 to 6,000 individual images. We've got two sets of labels. One of them is kind of our benchmark set of labels made by biologists from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and there's about 20,000 individual annotations of 13 images that were selected to try to provide as diverse of a species and habitat mix as possible. And then we also have this much larger crowdsourced set where we have about 1,000 images split up into a ton more tiles. And on these are about 300,000 individual labels and counting, because we're actually still actively collecting data from this project, which is on the Zooniverse platform, which is a participatory science platform. So coming into the summer school, my main goals were some help with data wrangling, just getting helping get labels into a standard format so that they'd be more easily worked with on this research project, and then ultimately all of this data is going to be available for public use. And so just making it easier for other researchers to work with as well. And then also dealing with noise in the crowdsourced label set. There's a wisdom in the crowd, but you have to kind of pull the signal from the noise. And so I was looking for some advice and tips on getting through that as well. And then also building a machine learning pipeline for incorporating transfer learning using another previously established model for detecting waterfowl from aerial imagery made by Ben Weinstein called Bird Detector. So my early steps is just getting these two, big non-standard annotation sets into a standardized format. So first, my primary goal was getting the Zooniverse labels into a standard format, because we'll be continuously getting data from Zooniverse, and so just having a quick tool for converting those was really vital, especially when the outputs are crazy and look like this. And then also just making our expert set from label box a little bit easier to work with. This is a static set at this point. We're not getting any more new ones from Fish and Wildlife. But then that's also its a whole own separate deal with with its whole own bounding box system. And label box currently is actually much easier to work with than it was when we established this project. You can actually export labels in Cocoa format from label box directly now, but because we were using the legacy editor, we can't do that. And I asked label box about just putting my project onto the new editor, and they're like, nope, that would erase all your labels. So I got to do it by hand. So this took most of it. Step 2 is thinking about the train val test splits going into the model. And this is a moment where I actually had to take a big step back, thinking about the way that the imagery was collected on this project. I actually didn't do most of the imagery collection. I came onto the project after that part was done. So I asked our partners at Fish and Wildlife for some past census data to get a general idea of, in deployment, what would the model be looking at on the ground, and how representative is our example set of what's out on the ground. So at the beginning of week 2, they managed to dig out some data that was about 20 years out of date, and I just got 2021 data on Monday. And looking at this data actually revealed some enormous flaws in our original sampling plan, or lack thereof. I asked about it, and the sampling plan was, let's go look for some ducks sitting on a pond, fly over them. So looking at the past survey data, our generalized class balance for that area should be about 60% ducks, 35% geese, 15% cranes. Here's what I have. At our core site, we have 98% ducks, 2% geese, less than 0.5% crane. At another auxiliary site, 90% crane, 10% ducks, and then in Albuquerque, 75% seagull. So this is a problem, and then I'm going to have to cope with down the line. But there's an even bigger problem than you think looking at this, because I'm missing a specific species of goose that is about 33% of the total bird occupancy over winter at Bosque del Apache. So this is just tuck this away, because this is just a problem that is for future Rowan. Okay, so anyway, I just decided to do some randomized train val test splits just to start getting an initial model pipeline working. We'll make a more rigorous one later. So we have another collaborator with us on the project who tested a few different model architectures performance with the expert annotated data set, and YOLA v5 performed the best out of them. So we have a working YOLA v5 pipeline. And then before coming into the summer school, I hadn't really thought about this very deeply. I just pull the weights from Ben Weinstein's bird detector to do the transfer learning. Would be great, except bird detectors on RetinaNet. So that wasn't going to work. So this led to a little bit more data pre-processing, because Deep Forest, which bird detector runs on, needs a different bounding box format, and then also just some general data curation work, matching the labels to the train val test images and moving separate folders together. And then there were just some exciting server problems at UNM. I was going to be using a cluster at UNM, but on the day that I was about ready to hit go on my model, UNM experienced just the most massive internet meltdown that I have ever heard of, and so like nothing was accessible for a few days. So that also took up a bunch of time. And then once we actually kind of got onto a VM that was actually working, just trying to troubleshoot the bird detector code base was a whole task in and of itself. So there was some more data cleaning, removing invalid labels. Apparently a lot of people on Zooniverse would just start a label and then finish without actually making full box. So there were a ton of 0 boxes that had to be gotten rid of. Some other little formatting issues like that would just kind of interrupt the model whenever it ran into a bad annotation. And then there was also just some significant troubleshooting involved with getting a multi-class implementation on bird detector, which is actually a simple object detector. It didn't do any classes beyond bird. Theoretically, it was supposed to be easy. In practice, it was not. And then after all that was fixed, There was this weird problem with the duplicated validation step that we thought was actually just stalling out the whole model completely. It turned out that it was actually doing the validation step correctly, but it was doing it twice. And so because the validation set was so big, we thought that it was stalling out. So we just had to circumvent it entirely and then do that manual at the end. But eventually we finally got some results. And they're not they're not the most marvelous results, and there's clearly a big problem with the goose class, which I kind of expected. Given that they look pretty similar to ducks, but this is definitely a start. And then this is just kind of looking at the, not breaking it out per class. So we're not doing a whole lot better than chance right now, but this gives a whole lot of room for improvement. But I was happy though, like kind of looking at the individual images, it's actually doing really well, even in some complex environments. You can see that there's some spurious detections like here and here, but like this is genuinely hard. Like this really does look like a duck, but it's getting some of the actual ducks and not too many of these weird little grass tufts, and then it's picking out the geese or the cranes in the cornfield. And then it actually did pretty well on the hard cases that I left in the validation set. We had 2 flights that were not actually really bird surveys. They were just sort of opportunistic flights that had birds in them, so I threw them in just to see how it would do. And it was performed surprisingly well. And then also extra credit, seagull was not a label class, but it it obviously wasn't classified correctly, but it found correctly that they were birds. So I think if I threw some seagull labels in it, it would actually probably do pretty well, just since the seagulls look pretty different from the other birds that were in the set. So I think mainly all this kind of stumbling around and running into different problems has just given me a lot of really rich work for thinking about what to do next. And so thinking about what a fair comparison would be for our scratch-trained model and this pre-trained forest model. I don't really know that that's necessarily a valid comparison, and if there's anybody has suggestions on how to square this without throwing away the work that's already been done, I would be very grateful. Otherwise, I'll be continuing to just ponder for a little while longer. And then the big one, though, is just improving our field data collection. We have a big collection planned for this fall at Bosque now that the rules regarding drone flights on national wildlife refuges have been revised. Mm-hmm. So we're going to purchase a blue list drone, hopefully a Wingtra, like on the slide here. And so this is really lit a fire for me to work with the biologists to make a rigorous field plan that can be replicated for future census efforts. So not just going out and be like, okay, let's just grab a few more images to make the data better, but just like, let's treat this like we're going to try to get the actual population count out this time and build a structure for doing this again in the future. But at the very least, I just got to get some snow geese. And so I want to test out some things with reducing the noise in the label set. So actually getting that image, that graph out, that validation graph out was a challenge because the crowdsourced set has 10 annotations per individual most of the time. And so we had to do a lot of suppression to just get a single set of labels to compare the model's performance against. And so I want to test a few different label refinement methods. In the past, for the expert set, we just used a minimum area box method to just reduce noise as much as possible. Then I had actually talked with Pietro at the barbecue about maybe this median box method. So kind of preserving the maximum wisdom of like where the actual bounding box is. And then plus this, plurality or majority vote to try to get like the most signal out of what the crowd is saying, or just keep doing what we just did, just use non-max suppression after the fact, since that's the least amount of effort and no pre-processing involved. And then also just iterating with some different data set sizes from the crowdsourced set to try to find the minimum necessary size so that as different refuge types ideally are added in the future, then we don't have to expend so much effort in getting tons and tons of labels. We can just collect a few, hopefully. And then also there's a lot of, like Casey was saying, knobs to be turned on hyperparameter fine tuning, and definitely better suppression that can be done to get rid of really tiny, like non-duck sized or odd sized boxes and different confidence thresholds, FX. And then I've been thinking if I can't find snow geese, or this is just something I'm interested in testing. There is another researcher who has done a lot of drone studies with snow geese at their summer range up north. And so getting some out of domain images of snow geese and then putting some of those into the model directly, and then also just making some synthetic images, segmenting out snow geese and throwing them on my backgrounds. Maybe that would work for detecting snow geese later when we can actually get some imagery of them in.
There's really nice models that will give you reasonable segmentations given an input box, like for free. And so you might not even have to draw the segmentations. It should, like, for your type of imagery, I bet it would work.
Oh, that would be amazing. even better.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is maybe a future direction that I'd like to look at. And then looking even further ahead, once we have an optimized model, I definitely want to work with the Fish and Wildlife team to clarify what kind of error they think would be acceptable for deployment. Human surveys undercount birds by like about 30%, so I think we have a lot of leeway here. And then I'd like to make a study of the process of actually like how we implement the models to derive the population metrics. So like getting into the actual applications of the work that we've been doing here. So I think my key lessons learned from the past 3 weeks are I definitely have, I feel like I have a lot better grounding. I know my unknowns about machine learning a lot better than I did when I came in. And then diversifying the data inputs is just a lot more important than the volume. I think that we had been over-focusing on volume, but at the expense of having a lot of redundant data that wasn't necessarily adding a whole lot to the models. And then the architectures might not be important, but the code base definitely is. And then, yeah, just trying to shift the project toward what to do with it or how we implement it rather than can we do it, because I think that we're really, really close to, yes, we can do it. So kind of redirecting the project in that direction is going to be a big thing that I can accomplish. So I just want to say thank you, especially to Ben for all the patient hours of helping me debug the bird detector code base. So I definitely would not have had anything to show today without you. And then Sarah and Caltech for hosting this amazing workshop, and all the instructors, TAs, guest speakers for the knowledge they've imparted, and then all of you, because you've been so wonderful. It's just been a privilege to get to know all of you. It's a community of passionate and talented and hardworking people, so I'm just so glad. Thank you so much.
Questions? Yeah.
Did you think maybe of including the little bushes as a class or inside the section? Did you classify or just detect? The detection.
Oh yeah, detection.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry if you said this at the beginning, but what's the kind of like end goal for the birds? Is it like to measure abundance or like just general numbers?
Yeah, so but yeah, looking at both the abundance and then relative abundance and kind of the occupancy of the different areas on the national wildlife refuges in the Southwest region.
So on the fair comparison idea, I have a few ideas, and I'd love that maybe you guys can weigh in. But so you have the deep forest code base, which is TensorFlow on RetinaNet, no, PyTorch RetinaNet, and then you have the YOLO-v5 code base, which is PyTorch YOLO-v5, and you have a model on YOLO-v5 that's been trained only under expert labels, and you have the model on deep forest that was pre-trained with the bird detector and then trained on. So in very simple,
crowdsource
labels. So in very simple thing you could do is take that deep forest code base and just train from scratch on only, or from ImageNet or whatever, on only the expert labels, so that you have like verified that that actually is similar to what you get with the YOLO-v5, and because you're using the same test set, right? And then you can add crowdsourcing and add the pre-training and do it all in one code base. You also could get Ben Weinstein's stuff and move out of the deep forest code base and just pre-train your own models on LiDAR 5. Any other thoughts on ways that she can try to do fair comparisons with the code that she has and the data she has?
I think it's fine to, you can use both architects. Just
Yeah.
use deep forest with and without, like with ImageNet and with the bird detector. And use YOLO V5 with ImageNet pre-trained weights or MS coordinates. And just then, if you don't document that well and state that this is not an apples to apples comparison, 100% of the month, then you're perfectly fine doing that.
Yeah. Since the test set's the same, I mean, it's, yeah, as long as you're clear about what was done. Okay. Awesome. Any more questions?
Yeah, so this is more of an ecology question, but at the beginning you talked about like having to flood these areas with water to make them into a habitable area for the birds. And you also talked about making sure there was enough food. So do you have like a team of botanists that goes out and makes sure that there's enough, the plants that they eat are there? Or like how do you manage the food part? Or how do they, I guess?
There's like a whole team at Bosque del Apache that I don't know a whole lot of the specifics about.
Sure.
But there's also a lot of the food base actually is opportunistic foraging in nearby agricultural fields too.
Cool, okay.
So there's some of that, and then also at the refuge they just literally grow some agricultural products for the birds too.
Wow,
That's
okay.
so crazy.
That's so wild.
I love that. Little buffets.
Yeah, like a corn or like corn snack.
Awesome. Okay, so we're running a little late. We're supposed to have a break. I think it would be good to take a break. So if we're okay with just pushing the last one, just going slightly later, that might be good. Because I think we'll all be better with like a bit of a break. So maybe let's take 15 minutes.